Hey friends, thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation Dick, Joe Saward, and I had about the 2026 Miami Grand Prix. Mercedes arrived in Miami without a single upgrade. They won anyway. Kimi Antonelli made another bad start. He recovered anyway. Max Verstappen completed a full 360-degree spin on lap 1. He finished on the podium anyway. And McLaren closed the gap to Mercedes for the first time this season, which would be the story, except Joe had a very specific reason why the three of us should not read too much into it. As you'll hear, we couldn't settle whether Miami showed us where the 2026 season is heading, or whether we'd been looking at an illusion. But before we get to our conversation, I need to ask, can you help us out? If this show adds value to your F1 experience, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app. Share this episode with other F1 fans. That's how people find us, and it's how we continue growing this community. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Okay, gentlemen, it is the days after the Miami Grand Prix. We have had a month without racing, so we have a lot to talk about that happened this weekend. We also had a sprint race. I don't know if we want to talk about that as well, but I want to open it up and ask for your race highlights. Dick, why don't you go first?
Well, this was the first race where they had the adjusted regulations around energy harvesting and that sort of thing. And I think it produced a race that was a bit more entertaining in that you weren't seeing the cars slowing down as dramatically down the straightaways. Now, I don't know if it's necessarily all down to the rules or the fact that the track layout at Miami was certainly a lot more kind in terms of how it allowed the cars to harvest their energy. However, it did seem, at least at Miami, to work. I still have my concerns about places like Monza. And I think Montreal coming up, I think it's going to be interesting there because there's not a whole lot of places in Montreal to harvest energy. So it may be that Montreal is a better test of what the new regs look like. However, having said all that, I found it to be a pretty entertaining weekend, and I've been a pretty harsh critic of the regs. So I'm willing to say, hey, at this stage, I think it's an improvement. I still don't think I'm wrong, but I'll take the improvement.
What about you, Joe?
Well, I think that the changes to the rules were moderately sensible, if only from a safety point of view. I don't think that really it helps very much to play with things from a sort of entertainment point of view, but I think from safety they needed to do it, and therefore it happened. Because I'm a great believer in the fact that the teams are such intelligent organizations that they will sort out the problems before too long. I think, Dick, talking about Monza, I think by Monza we'll have forgotten a lot of this stuff because they'll have the machinery, they'd have the data, they'll learn how to do it, the drivers will learn how to use it more. And so I think what they did was that they sort of, it's sort of a cosmetic fix in lots of respects because of all the negative comment, but at the same time there was a level of change necessary because the safety angle is important, and it was not healthy as it was. I thought the racing was great. I thought it was fun. I thought the right team won basically because they had the best car. It was interesting in the sprint race because McLaren won that, but I think that was a little bit fortuitous. It's a bit like the sprint race in China last year, when Lewis Hamilton won in a Ferrari. They're a little bit odd because sprint race weekends, you get no time to prepare. It's just who's in the best spot at that best moment. And then once you're in the lead, and, for example, Kimi made an appalling start as usual. And that was it for him. So, in the end, you get a different winner. But it's a little bit like, I understand why they've done it, and they do get more people watching it as a result. But I'm firmly against things like reversing grids and stuff because it's just just gimmicky, and it doesn't really help because it doesn't. I don't pay any attention to wins in a reverse grid race in Formula 2, for example. I have no interest, unless the guy's driven through from 10th on the grid. I mean, I keep an eye on it, but if they haven't, if the guy who was on pole in a reverse grid wins the race, I'm not interested because, as far as I'm concerned, they gave him a victory.
Yeah. I like both of y'all's points because if anything, it leads to what I think I came to the conclusion was McLaren being able to challenge Mercedes and Red Bull having made adjustments. Hopefully the development wars are actually happening and bringing some good competition. But if anything, my thought was I'm going to wait until Barcelona to see where the race actually lands there and what everyone has done because of I had to think through how much of this is the adjustments to the rules, how much is this the natural development aspect that happens over the course of the first few races. And then this unexpected delay gave time to teams to really evaluate what the data they had received. It's uncharacteristic, but they also had to have had their timelines of this is where development will happen. Like I kept thinking about McLaren having put a lot of their efforts towards their 25 car. In my mind, if I was making that decision in 25, I would have said, okay, Miami would be the first realistic place to do an upgrade, regardless, even knowing that they were going to have the Saudi and Qatar races, right? Like you would have thought through the timeline of how quickly could you close any potential gap. That would be, in my mind, as you're planning, just the logical way to mitigate risk or knowing that you're going all in one direction. How do you recover as quickly as possible? So when I looked at this and I thought, okay, they're doing what I would expect. And it seems like Miami being a high energy circuit also may give the things that we've been wanting to see and give the time for what you said, Joe, the cosmetic and addressing, Dick, what you said of like what we have been critical of these regs. I thought it was a good race overall. I wasn't disappointed, and I think I agree with you, Joe, that the team that I expected and wanted to win won. I just wonder, as we move forward through the calendar, will the teams close the gap even further? Like, and that's what I'm looking forward to. Joe, you're laughing?
Yep, I am, because we need to make one very important point here, and that is that a lot of the teams bought upgrades to Miami. Mercedes didn't. And so Mercedes were basically fighting with the car they started the season with, and the others had the time to bring stuff out. Now, they got closer, and that's great. But watch out, because in Canada, Mercedes may accelerate away some more. So
I agree.
why I'm laughing, because, we've seen, okay, it was closer, and that's great that it was closer, but it doesn't mean it's going to be closer all the time. We'll see.
I agree
Yeah,
with
no,
you. Oh, go
that's
ahead,
a
Joe.
great point. Yeah. I'm glad Joe brought that up because Mercedes brought nothing, but they said, oh yeah, we're bringing a package for Canada, and so it's just sort of like how big of a jump is that going to be? Because we know they know how to develop a car, and so usually when they bring an upgrade, it's a step forward. So everybody else has got to be saying, okay, what do we have to do now to get better? So I mean, this is a great example of competition improving everybody. Right. And so, to Joe's earlier point, come Monza, we very may well say, hey, this energy harvesting issue is a thing of the past as they get their arms around it. I don't know. We'll see how they do with dealing with physics and science. But they've certainly got a bunch of smart people noodling on that. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the fact that Mercedes didn't bring upgrades and everyone else did does give a important standard setting, like of how you judge what we saw. And if anything, it makes me want to ask this question that I had, which is what does Kimi's start problem reveal about the broader Mercedes system? And does it tell us about like his ability to keep winning? Like if, as we just said, they didn't bring upgrades, and assuming everybody else does improve, is this a potential major problem for Kimi moving forward?
I don't think so. I think, okay, he hasn't quite got the hang of the starting, but I think in the sprint race you saw George had got the hang of the starting. But, Kimi made a slow start in the race, but made up for it very quickly. So I think the fact they didn't bring an upgrade to Miami is an indication of the confidence there is at Mercedes. And there were people at the start of the year who said, well, they're sandbagging a little bit. They're not doing as much as they possibly could. I'm not sure that's true, but I think they know that they have enough. What's interesting from a Mercedes point of view, not to go into the teams too early, but the fact that Kimi is basically dominating George, which is, for me, it was a little bit unexpected. I mean, I rate Kimi very highly, as you know, but it's been much quicker than I expected. And we'll see. Maybe George will be able to get it all together and come back at him. That's what I would expect to see. But just because Kimi's only just left school doesn't mean he's not got iron in his bones. And this is something I think that people don't understand. This kid is seriously good, and that's why Toto Wolff took such a massive risk. He put him in place of Lewis Hamilton. Let us not forget that, and there is a reason for that. And I think that we will see. I don't think Kimi's going to fluff things under pressure very often. He's going to make mistakes. All drivers do. But I don't think he's going to make a lot because he's young.
Dick, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a big Kimi fan, and I am also quite surprised that he has basically handled George 3 races in a row now. Now, we have to say that George lost a race because of an ill-timed safety car, so that would have changed our conversation a little bit. But, at Miami, it was clear that George never really got the handle on the car for whatever reason. And, there's a lot of people saying, well, he does better on certain tracks that, where the temperatures are cooler and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, fine. I think he's really got to assert himself in Montreal, quite frankly. That's a track he goes well at. It's a track that would be more his strong suit. I was listening to another podcast, and the comment is that Kimi has always been very, very good in the low speed corners, and he's gotten to be almost on par with George in the medium and high speed corners where George excels. And so suddenly that extra couple of tenths of a second, that's the difference between Kimi and George right now. And so anyway, that's kind of my take on it. It'll be interesting to see.
I think there's something I should have mentioned before, and you alluded to it just now, and that is the temperature. And I think Miami was really hot, and traditionally Mercedes haven't done so well when it's very, very hot. And they've done a lot better when it's cool. Well, we go to Canada, and believe me, it's going to be cool there, because this race is a lot earlier in the year than normally would be the case. And the weather in Montreal is not great at the end of May. It's getting into mid-June. It can still be very, very cold. But, there are serious worries about what the temperature will be. So I would think that we'll see there, perhaps, Mercedes pulling away without any upgrades. I mean, they'll have upgrades as well. It might be difficult to tell, but I think that the temperature should not be something we ignore.
I agree
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah,
They always seem to go well in those cool races. They do.
and you guys actually answered a question that I had when I wanted to move to talk about Kimi and George, and we did that so great. So let's move on to Lando and Oscar and the McLaren team. Let me ask you, we're talking about the upgrade cycle. What were y'all's thoughts about, is this now a new competitive edge and strength that they have that we saw for the first time, or do you think time needs to tell us more?
Yeah, sure. I think certainly McLaren has closed the gap. Um, I think that there's still a few tenths away, and of course, then what sort of package is Mercedes bringing in Canada? But of course, you don't know. I mean, McLaren may have a couple of new bits that they're bringing out that they know are worth a little bit of time. So, but if if Mercedes finds 0.3 of a second, I would say that to be on par, McLaren probably needs to find another 4 to 5 tenths, something like that, if Mercedes makes a jump. Because I'm not completely sold on the idea that that McLaren has pulled even with Mercedes yet. They're close, but I'm not sold that they're even.
So the question I guess I had was, it felt like we were watching, what was it, 2023, where McLaren comes to Miami, and it felt like a sea change for them moment. Do you feel that that's what we saw? Joe, I also want to make sure you're included in this conversation, so feel free to jump in. But do you feel like this could be that, or is it, again, too premature to be able to say that?
Well, I think it's too early to be able to say, because when you have some people upgrade and others not, you can get illusionary factors. And there's also the track specificity. I can never get this word right. Specificity as well. Because some cars just work better at certain tracks than others, and it's part of Formula One. So there may be a combination of all of this that has made the McLaren look really good, has made the Red Bull look good, made the Ferrari look moderately better. They've all made some progress, but Mercedes haven't really, they got the gloves on, but they haven't punched anybody yet. And I think that's what we need to see in Canada. And in fact, I think I'm with Sabrina on this. I think it's still too early, even after Canada, to judge the full implications of who's where. But that's the way of the Formula One world these days. There's a reason that these teams have thousands of engineers working at the same time, and it goes up and down from weekend to weekend as to who's where and why they're there. And it's very, very difficult to judge. It's almost impossible to predict unless somebody's way ahead. And with a new set of regulations, gaps get closed a lot faster than when regulations are mature, because it's easier to do, that people learn, oh, that's wrong. So I would expect to see the people at the back. And we saw it this weekend a little bit with Williams. They made a lot of changes and they were much more in the game. Now, there's more changes coming from them with their weight question. But I think all the teams went there, with the possible exception of Aston Martin. Everybody went there with a little bit more optimism, and a little bit more performance. And I think we'll see that over time. The grid will close up. You are fundamentally constrained by the chassis you built at the beginning, so there is an element that you can't change until next year. And I think you'll see that with the likes of Cadillac and Aston as well, to be honest. They're never going to catch up and get in the mix totally this year, because the original or the basic module is wrong, and so they need to fix things to get anywhere close to the pace. So you can take weight off and all the rest of it, but there's a lot of other things to take into account.
When you were speaking, Joe, two things came to my mind that I think is important for a newer fan to the sport. First is when you talked about the fundamental gaps that occur, it made me think of, when you're first learning a higher advanced math like algebra, calculus, all that. I know Joe's like, "What? No, I know. I hated it too." I know, Dick, you thrive in all that stuff. But I remember the first times you're learning the concept, you struggle. But once you get those basic fundamentals, it's a building block. You're able to then start to do higher and higher, more advanced. Well, at a certain point, even me, I'm like, no, there's no reason. I have no desire. But it's the same concept as you were talking. It's like initially when you're first learning, okay, what can I do within these regs? You're going to make some major bad calculations, but you go back and you relearn it. You figure out, oh, who got it right? Because when you're, at least when I was in school, I don't know if it's still the same way. When you're in your math class, people have to go up to the board and show their work, do the example. You start to learn from other people. How do you do it properly? Like that was, at least the teachers would say, show your work and make you do the full steps while the class is watching, which is overwhelming at times, if you're not sure about what you're doing. But I think that this is what the teams are doing. They're doing a very public display of showing their work. Other teams are watching, learning from their mistakes or their right solutions, and they go back to the drawing board as these highly tuned teams and figuring out, okay, how can we replicate that? I mean, because one thing that I noticed was now, isn't it Ferrari has the Macarena wing? Or no, who came, Red Bull came up with it too, right? So it's the same idea. Like you learn from each other and you start to improve. And then the gap, as you just said, closes up quickly because everything that you can do within that rules is accomplished. And then that's where you start to see the driver's ability and the team's ability to really execute starts to come into play. It's not so much about concept and implementation, but it's about execution at that point.
I think what you're saying is correct. There is the law of diminishing returns, obviously, in the course of a regulation period. And it's very good at the end. If, as we saw last year, at the end of the regulation period, it was fantastically close. But these teams are working on so many different levels, not just about performance. They're working, for example, just as for American fans, this is an interesting one. Williams is introducing a system of summer camps in America in the future, which I think is absolutely a brilliant idea, because they are going to run loads of kids through a Formula One type summer camp, and they're going to pick up brilliant engineers as a result of that. They have a very, very strong education program in Britain already, and they're building for the future. They're not looking at university graduates to recruit in the future. They're looking at kids who will love Williams because that's where they learned it. This kind of level of competition is something that I don't think a lot of fans understand. They're fighting over children as well. I mean, they're drivers, we've already seen that. They fight over 11-year-old kartists. But every single thing you can improve, they're trying to improve. And even if they're not on track right now being dominant, that will have an impact over time.
100% agree with you on that. And I'm glad that you brought that up because I do think that this is the part about the culture of the sport that is often overlooked right now when you're thinking more about the drama of the sport. You fail to realize the underpinnings that keeps the sport going for many more decades. And it has a pour over effect of even if the kid does not go into Formula One racing, they have now been ignited towards that field, which then means either A, they will be a consumer of Williams products and a cheering fan of Williams, and they could be in a different field bringing wonderful value to society. They could be the next person who comes up with a solution that we don't even realize right now we have a problem. So I think it's a fantastic way that Williams is off the track. Dick, you, I think, want to jump in?
Yeah, I would add one other thing, thinking about it from a business perspective. If you're looking at thousands of kids, there's going to be a handful of them that over, several decades will wind up rising into the position of a decision maker at a corporation that could eventually be a sponsor. They could be the internal champion to bring their company in as a sponsor partner to a Williams or whoever they have that affinity for. So that's another thing down the road.
Well, so it's interesting that you should say that because I was catching some of the news of the off-site stuff, and I hadn't realized. And I know everyone's talked about like this Apple and Formula One collaboration, which I think is fantastic. And I realized as I was listening, the person in charge of it, the VP, I think his name is Bobby Q. He
Ed-
noted that yeah, I'm sorry.
Eddie Q.
Eddie Q. He said that he's been watching as an American Formula One since a kid. And I thought to myself, that's the sport that I am proud of, that it falls in line with what you and John, Dick have talked about, like watching and following the sport when it wasn't such a cool thing to do in the United States. And look at where now that relationship, that fandom that he generated, now it's bringing for the rest of us here in the United States and globally, and really pushing the boundaries of how we consume the sport. I think it's so fantastic. It goes back to the wisdom of Williams doing these summer camps. Joe?
Yeah, I think there's another really interesting example of this. If you've, and I'm sure some readers have been, if you've ever been an American Boy Scout, you'll know about the Pinewood Derby. And the Pinewood Derby was basically a competition in which you make an inanimate object, a brick made of wood, go faster down a path than something else. And, you learn some things along the way how to do it. And either as a Boy Scout or the dad of a Boy Scout, because most of these cars are actually built by the dads when you when you admit it out loud. But that concept was kind of borrowed by an organization called F1 in Schools, which is probably 20 odd years ago. And F1 in Schools is responsible for so many engineers who started out doing F1 in schools, went on to doing Formula Student, which is where universities compete against each other, end up going to Cranfield University, where there's this specialist, a master's in motorsport engineering, and they end up in Formula One. And, there's a reason for all of this. And it starts when they're very young. When you're 6 or 7 and you have your first Pinewood Derby car, it can start there. And I think that it's really interesting. You could almost call it indoctrination if you like, but what it is just lighting the spark of inspiration of another generation. And that, I think, is brilliant. And that's what Formula One should always be doing.
I agree, and I love that it's happening here in the United States, because I do think that that's a good transplant of what you're saying has been historically within the sport, but really in Europe, now bringing it here and helping our students to see that this is a global sport, not just our own American racing as well. Because Dick, I know that you have experience with these elements as well, and it's more with our American racing side. So to see this kind of cross-pollination and work to really bring a global focus, I think is really exciting. Now, we kind of went off on a tangent, which I'm totally happy to, but I also want to just make sure that we don't overlook any race-specific highlights. So we kind of talked about Kimi and George. I want to kind of look down the list. Lando and Oscar, any thoughts about their race? Max and Isack, looking at the teams, those next two teams?
Yeah, sorry. McLaren, I think, was typical McLaren. Oscar's nearly there. Lando's there on a good day. I still think there is a level of I wouldn't say weakness. That's not the right word in Lando, but he can be very, very inconsistent. Whereas Oscar is a bit more solid in that respect. And so, they both had their moments. Lando won the sprint, and that's great. But on the whole, I think, yes, the teams move forward. We don't know how much. In terms of Red Bull, just to go on from that quickly, Max has obviously got confidence in the car. And you minute give Max confidence in a car, watch out everybody else, because he is a mighty driver. Isaac's in the classic Red Bull number 2 slot, and he had a rotten weekend, really. But he's tough. He was very disappointed. He's very harsh on himself, which is great in a racing driver. And sometimes you almost feel sorry for him because he's so harsh on himself. But he's doing better than many of Max's teammates have done. But being next to Max is a tough job.
Yeah, I really was hoping as I watched it that the tough on himself does not lead to a spiral. I think, and it's just knowing how far to push himself where he doesn't start that negative loop that I feel like the rest of the second drivers have succumbed to. So I wonder though, Dick, you're the racer. What are your thoughts on any of that? Lando, Oscar, Max, Isack?
Well, I thought it was absolutely brilliant, fortuitous, whatever you want to call it, that Max on the first lap with the pack all around him does a full 360-degree spin, winds up pointing the right way, nobody hits him, and he doesn't hit the wall, and he takes off in sort of like, I don't know, 15th position, something like that, and then comes back up to the field. It was fun to watch because he made some passes on the outside of Leclerc and in a fast corner and stuff like that, and I'm going, "Whoa, Max, I don't know." He's always talking about, "Oh, I don't ever wanna do Indianapolis." So I was like, "Dude, you just did Indianapolis." You know? And, so I really enjoyed it. I was glad that the upgrade package that Red Bull brought was a good one. I'm not really sure how they got the floor wrong. I guess it was an installation issue on Isaac's car. But that really, I think, put Isaac on his back foot, and he was sort of like, man, I've got to make a lot of ground coming off of, the pit lane start and all this kind of jazz. And I think that they piled unnecessarily a bunch of pressure on a young driver who's desperate to prove himself against, really the best driver on the grid. And that's a lot. That's a lot. And so anyway, I hope Isaac is able to learn the lesson and forget the pain, so to speak, and then move forward from there. So anyway, but I enjoyed Max. I did it a lot.
It's funny because when it happened, I thought about you and wondered if you were enjoying watching that display. But I did want to go a little bit further on the Isaac part. What do you think but both of you can answer this. What do you think he needs right now from the team? What we said about him being harder on himself, the weekend not really going in a direction that he would have wanted, the technical, as you noted, very likely an installation issue. What would we say to a driver like that if we were advising the team about how they should be handling him? Because he has been doing good, right? And they have developed the car. Max had a fantastic recovery. He showed his technique. Like, what's the conversation that needs to happen?
He needs to feel that he is believed in by the team. And this has been one of the problems in the past. Some of the drivers have not felt that their team believed in them because Max was there, because of their own innate insecurities, whatever it was. If you look at how they individually did, for example, you'll see Alex Albon did better than many people thought, and it was a bit odd when they dropped him, I thought. But obviously, Red Bull has marketing goals or whatever they have, whatever the reason they chose Perez over Albon. I never really understood that, because Albon was solid. He did a good job and he was learning, and he could have won a couple of races if he hadn't been unlucky. So they don't all fade and suffer, but the weaker ones do. I think Isaac's pretty tough, mentally speaking. And he's obviously, he's got a lot of ability too. So I think we need to see, but he has to believe that the team is confident in him. And if he doesn't believe that, it's over, basically. At the moment, I think he does. But the other thing is, he doesn't want to make mistakes like he did and crash into the wall for no reason. He made mistakes, the team made mistakes, but you can't afford to mess up too often for that belief to go away.
And I would add to that in that, yes, I think that whole thing about the team believing in you is a big deal. And I think if you took a page out of, Toto Wolff's notebook about how he dealt with Kimi last year, I think that's the model that I would want to follow. I think you see it in James Vowles as well, even though he's got much more experienced drivers than a Kimi or an Isaac. You can see that he's still doing that sort of thing. And so I think, as great as a driver may be, they're still human beings, and they still need to know that, they've got people's support and all that, and especially in a team sport like that. And so I think, Laurent Meki's putting his arm around Isaac and saying, okay, so what did we do well? What did we not do well? What have we learned? Having just one of those kind of deals, not, oh my gosh, you screwed up. I think that would be probably very helpful for that young man right about now.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to agree. And in that sense, I am glad for the change in leadership over at Red Bull. It does give me a slight amount of encouragement that maybe that is what happened in those hours after the race. So let's move on to Ferrari, Charles and Lewis. Y'all's thoughts or the team itself?
To be honest, it wasn't particularly exciting. It was a sort of, there was some progress for sure. Lewis and Charles were where Lewis and Charles have been. Lewis seemed happier. Charles is happy enough. I mean, at the end of the race, Charles went slightly bonkers, but I think he was very frustrated by the end of it all, and he ended up with enormous numbers of penalties for driving over every bit of non-track he could. It looked like it. And he's fundamentally by nature he's still a bit Italian, even if he comes from Monaco. So he's a bit lively in that respect. And uh, otherwise, it was just sort of closer but no cigar.
So on that, I was really confused by the penalty. You guys to help me out on this. It seemed pretty harsh, like 20 seconds. Didn't we have something very similar a few years ago where Lewis had gone off the track towards the end, but it hadn't been such a harsh penalty? Do you mind helping me understand this? I'm sorry?
Well, if you watch the in-car of Charles's last lap, he forgot where the racetrack was. He just drove the fastest route, and he went over, I think, 3 different areas where he should not have been. It was somebody who was not fully in control, who'd run into the wall, was annoyed, probably at himself more than anything else, but he just forgot what the rules were. And that's why he got 20 seconds of penalties. I think it was 20 seconds because each time was 5 or, whatever. Maybe it was 3 times he got 5-second penalty and 5 for being silly. I don't know. But fundamentally, if you watch the in-car on Charles's last lap, it's just mad. So
it wasn't a mechanical issue? I thought
it's
it was
mechanical because he ran into the wall and smashed up his car. But the car wasn't that badly broken, until he'd been passed by everybody. And then he just seemed to go sort of, I don't care about this anymore. It was almost like that. It was interesting. Anyway, if you do have access to the in-car of Charles's last lap, it's quite enlightening.
Okay, because I understood that the steering had been an issue and it was not. And so what I'm hearing you say is there was a level of, I don't want to say intentionality can be misinterpreted. I mean, as in the car was still under his control and he still had the ability to move it in the direction it needed to. The emotion is what's leading to the decision making. Okay.
There may have been an element that the steering wasn't quite right, but he still managed to get round the whole lap, without anything. So it was obviously steering to some extent. But I just got the impression when looking at it that he's just lost it and I don't care anymore. That was what it looked like to me. Now, I may be wrong, but that's what it looked like to me.
Okay. Dick, did you have any insight into this?
Well, I tend to side with Joe on this one. He had a spin that originally, because of where it was and all that, I was kind of like, something had to have broken or a tire went down or something like that. But later on, Charles said, no, that was me, which, full credit to him. But when he bashed the wall, that his alignment was certainly not going to be great. And then after that, I was just that last lap, I was just sitting there, what on earth is going on? But having not seen the onboard video, but now having heard Joe's side of it, I would say the red mist took over and he was just sort of like, I'm just whatever. I'm just going to do whatever I need to do to get it thing home. And because my race is cooked anyway, and so I kind of think it all makes sense to me. The other thing I would say is that Ferrari brought the most upgrades of any team. And I think they brought like 28 new pieces to the car that were submitted to the FIA. And, again, I think the car it was not the best car on the grid, maybe the 3rd or 4th best on the grid. Lewis had a weird race. I think he should have been a little bit more competitive, but I heard that he had actually sustained some minor front wing damage on the first lap, and that took some performance away from him. So he may have actually done very well, and we just don't know about it. It's one of those kind of things. But, at some stage, you've got to be sitting here. If you're Charles, when are you going to say, hey, look, Ferrari is not going to put me in a position to win the world championship? And I think that's the bigger, it's too early to start talking about the silly season, but maybe it's not too early. So
I was going to say it's not too early.
Yeah. Okay.
Already the rumblings are already beginning. You can hear them up and down the paddock. In the different teams, there's just sort of, are we happy with him? And he's going, am I happy with this? Can I do better? It's already started. So, um, in terms of when we'll start to hear anything, we'll have to wait and see. There may be deals already done. That there are sometimes deals are done a long time in advance. For this particular year, it's a bit different because of the new regs. People don't know at the beginning of the new regs who's going to have the best engines, which will impact on more than one season, obviously. And so um, making very early choices is less likely than in previous years. So I think we'll see a lot of action at the end of this year. A lot of contracts are up at the end of this year too. And I think that Charles is certainly somebody who will be in demand probably from elsewhere. And to be honest, let's face it, Ferrari have got a pretty good option. If Charles decides to go, they've got Ollie Behrman sitting in the wings. So he switches across from Haas and he'll do a good job. He's young, but he's again very mature. And as we saw in Saudi Arabia when he made his F1 debut, he could handle the pressure.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's really funny is that I was walking my dog this morning. I was musing about Charles and what he might do, and I had come to the conclusion that Ollie Behrman was obviously the guy to fill that seat. At least it seems obvious to me. But then there's also, does Lewis stick around for another season or two? Does he stay around? I mean, Ferrari potentially at the end of this year could lose both of their drivers if Lewis said, you know what, I think I'm done. I've got an ambassadorship for life with Ferrari. I'm good. I don't know that would happen, but boy, oh boy, Ferrari could be in a world of hurt.
Yeah, I think Lewis is interesting because he still got it to some extent, for sure. But I think in a way, to get Lewis out of Formula One is going to take someone else's action, not his, because I think I honestly think he doesn't know what else to do. I mean, he has a whole bunch of things he does outside racing, but I don't think he's inspired by very much of it. I think he has lived racing his entire life, and I think he might find the rest of the world a bit scary. He doesn't need to do anything forever, obviously, but the idea of not being part of this world he's been an important and dominant part of is a difficult thing to accept. And in a way, Alonso is a little bit in the same place, except he's in a far worse car. But you're talking about mid-40s now, both of them. They're racing against. Alonso said it last weekend. I've got a kid now, and it makes you think differently. But he then came up with a great line, which is, but at the same time, I'd like to see the kid watch me racing. And they thought, okay, Fernando, old boy, it's going to be 5 years before the kid remembers anything, and you will be nearly 50 by then. To be honest, you're going to be struggling. But there you are. There's also an element you've got to bear in mind that very often drivers don't know when to stop because they still think they're great because they've got that self-belief they've always had that got them there. And very often it's a little bit of failure that causes them to accept the passage of time. So we'll see how it goes. But in terms of making the decision at the right time, almost every driver who retires makes the decision at the wrong time. Very few of them left at the very top when they should have done. Nico Rosberg being a very good example of that. But Jackie Stewart, for different reasons, he left at the peak. But almost everybody else went into a decline after their great years and were never able to get to that level again. So it's an interesting psychological case, the case of sportsmen retiring.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. As you were speaking and Fernando saying, well, I'd like my kid to see me race and all that kind of stuff. I get that. It's very interesting. Sabrina and I have a mutual friend whose dad he's got 3 Super Bowl rings, quite accomplished from American football. And, by the time his dad hung it up, he was, I don't know, 6, 7 years old, and he vaguely remembers going to some of his dad's games and watching him, but that's it, and so Today, he's, a grown man and doing business with his dad in his dad's business. But he doesn't really remember his dad playing unless he looks at a highlight reel on YouTube. So it and I think a lot of these guys like Fernando, I think that they're gonna have to be happy with YouTube.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And if anything, as you were talking about, if either Charles or Lewis leave and those seats become open, I guess the question I have is I get the sense, I agree with you that the Ferrari just looking to Ollie makes sense, right? Like the rising talent. But for Ollie, is that really the best call at this point for his career? I mean, if Charles, I don't think anybody questions his capability. It feels that it hasn't been unable to be realized. The potential hasn't been given. So what's the proposition for a young rising talent like Ollie to go to Ferrari other than the prestige of going to
He
Ferrari?
already has a contract.
Well, yes, I agree with you
Agreement
on that.
with
Yeah,
Frank-
yeah,
Mc-
yeah.
Ferrari have probably got him under contract for years
Yeah.
to come.
Yes.
We don't really know that, but they obviously want to have somebody who they can slot in, and he is their man. So how long that lasts for, and also to be honest, let's face it, every young racing driver wants to be a Ferrari driver, and they all think
Yeah.
they can win the world championship with Ferrari. Well, in the last 20 years, nobody's done that much. So actually, it is. I think is it the 19th or the 20th season? No, 19th season, I think, since a Ferrari driver won a world championship, which is an entire generation. So perhaps the gloss is wearing a bit thin, but it's still Ferrari. And, if you walk around wearing a Ferrari racing suit, you're no shortage of people throwing themselves at you and lauding you as being wonderful.
Yeah, I think, and that's what I think I was alluding to. I think you said it very well, which is like the gloss has gone away. But I think that this is something that we actually have a listener question we'll talk about in a different conversation about the Ferrari and Formula One relationship, because I do think it's something to explore a bit more. But and that leads back to where I think that Charles's emotion was at that race was not a fun race for him. And I mean, it doesn't excuse the behavior, especially based off of what you're saying you saw on the onboards and what you took away, Joe. That isn't what you expect of any racing driver at the level of Formula One. In that red mist, it's real, but they're also such amazing athletes that you expect them to be able to hold that together. So I now can see why the penalty was given at such an extreme level. Okay, so moving on to the rest of the grid, we do have a few more, and I know time is getting away from us. Wanted to kind of let's go through the Franco and Pierre, Carlos and Alex, Ollie and Esteban. Any thoughts on any of those drivers' races?
I thought Franco did a great job, and which kind of surprised me. But I tell you what's really interesting, and it didn't really appear very much on the TV, but Franco went home to Buenos Aires and drove a very old Alpine car around the streets, and 600,000 people turned up to watch. And that kind of level of support, he does have an absolutely lunatic following, which you can see sometimes in races. There's always a bunch of Argentines somewhere waving flags and dancing around. And if you say anything bad about him, you get abused endlessly on social media by lots and lots of very nasty people. And that happens with Mexicans and others, but we're not going into that. But I thought Franco did a great job, and I can't help but wonder whether or not that demonstration of the love that this country has for him really helped him in terms of confidence, and made the team, that confidence becomes, it gets spread among the team. And he looked good. The team felt he was better. The confidence rose across the board, and he did a great job. Pierre, you can't really say much because he was fundamentally taken out before he could do much, and he was pretty disappointed, and I understand why. Just moving swiftly on from that to Williams, they've started on the process of making that car better. There's a lot more to be done, but they know what they're doing, and there is a program. They're obviously late on production as usual. They need to fix that problem, but it's moving in the right direction, and that will help. How fast they do that, we'll see. But those are those two teams. Beyond that, if anyone else has got things to say, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say is if anything, the Franco part, I understood that Alpine brought a new monocoque to this race, which brought it into the weight limits that they were wanting to. So that coupled with the emotional resurge that you just noted, Joe, I could see how that would give him such a boost going into also Miami, which is a very Latin focused race out of our three races here in the United States. You've got a lot of that community coming together. So like I could see that just that jazz vibe, which would encourage him. And then with Williams, I think also didn't what you just said about bringing those upgrades. It seems like it's bringing them to where they wanted to be really earlier in the season and bodes well. Thoughts, responses?
Yeah, I would typically have to say that um, that I'm in agreement with everything that y'all are saying. I mean, I would love to see some of the video from Franco's exhibition. I saw, I think, about a 5-second snippet of it. Like Joe was saying, very old car that he was driving and all that. But when 600,000 people show up to see you do some donuts in the streets, that tells you a lot. And it probably sent a message to Alpine as well, from a leadership standpoint. But I also think that with the improvements that were made to the Alpine chassis, they're clearly at this point, and this season is going to be in a state of flux. But at this point, and at least on that particular circuit, they were well clear of the rest of the midfield. And so Franco was given a good car, and I think he got pretty much everything out of that car that could be expected to be gotten out of it. So Alpine needs to be happy with that performance. And I think, Pierre was right there too. I was a little surprised that Franco had Pierre covered most of the weekend, but they were very, very close. So they're obviously pushing each other.
Yeah,
So
I think Pierre had a different kind of front wing. At some point, he had something that Franco didn't have, and Franco nonetheless did well. So, I think that's important too, because you don't always know who's got the best bits. But in that case, they did say that Franco didn't have the same as Pierre.
interesting. I did not know that. So yeah, so that just makes it an even better job by Franco. And then Williams, I'm a big fan of both of Carlos and Alex, and I'm glad to see them in a position where they're getting more and more competitive. But they've still got a long way to go just to get back really to where they were, last year. Because last year they were a fairly competitive proposition. Obviously, 2 podiums by Carlos last year. They're not looking like anything close to that right now. So they've got to dig in and just they've just got to keep grinding to get the car where it needs to be.
Okay, well, I think that those are great insights. Let's just look at the rest of the field. Ollie, Esteban, Arvid, Liam, Fernando and Lance, Sergio Valtteri, Nico and Gabby. Any of those drivers or teams? I feel in a lot of cases because we had DNFs, we had it just was a sad weekend for many of them. I don't know how much more other than that we should be able to say, or it's just hopefully they'll be able to come back forward into Canada. But any of
There,
your thoughts, gentlemen?
there were some screw ups along the way. I mean, Audi had a problem, a legality question on Gabriel's car, which shouldn't happen. That kind of thing should not happen. The fact that it did is not good. There were reliability problems for Nico as well. The Cadillacs have made some improvement, but they're still way off. The Astons didn't look any different, but apparently the vibration is better. But the others, I don't know if it's circuit specific. I thought that the livery on the Racing Bulls was the most horrible Formula One livery I have ever seen.
Thank
Um,
you.
so
Thank
that
you.
was just
100% agree.
me. I don't know who chooses that stuff, but whoever it did, it looked like a Spanish omelet with black tires around it. It was just a mess. But there you are. Thankfully it's only the one race, I hope. Because normally the team looks half decent, but it just looked horrid. So, but the cars weren't very good. So we'll see how it goes. But again, some of it's specific to the circuit and the temperatures, all these other things we've discussed already. So I think Canada will give us a different perspective. And, one should never jump to too many conclusions based on one race alone. That's, I think, the bottom line of all of this, is that you have to take things over a period of time to get a really clear picture. The other thing which is interesting, you mentioned Barcelona. Barcelona is a place that sorts out the teams. It's not about drivers. It's about which car is the best car. And so you often see there's a pecking order there. And quite often in Barcelona, you'll see it team by team by team going down the grid, which gives you a very clear indication, which is why they've always used it for testing in the past, because it's that kind of a track. There are certain others that are fairly similar, but it does give you a clear indication of a snapshot in time, obviously, because everything's moving all the time.
Dick, what are your thoughts on any of those? But I have to say, before you jump in, I 100% agree with you, Joe, regarding that livery. I was mortified when I was embarrassed for Racing Bulls when I saw that. I couldn't figure out who the team was initially. I was like, who created this? I thought that's not what you want for a livery.
So my comment would be is that Racing Bulls was so anonymous in that race. I mean, the results say they were there, but I didn't see them. So the livery did not register with me one way or the other. So I'll just go with that. And I guess that sounds cruel, but I mean, they were just pretty much nowhere other than, the coming together of Lawson and Gasly, where he put Gasly on his head, which was pretty dramatic. Unfortunately, Pierre was okay. I mean, where else did the Racing Bull feature? I mean, they just were nowhere. Haas, they kind of had a fraught weekend. They were not, they've been there or thereabouts. They're not right now. Now, maybe they didn't bring an upgrade package and everybody else.
They didn't bring enough any upgrades. So
there you go. Yeah. And so it showed, they lacked competitiveness. Aston Martin didn't bring any updates, which, I mean, until they solve the vibration issue, who cares? You've got to get you got to get your fundamental blocking and tackling done first, and they haven't done that yet, although it seems like they've made progress. And hey, Fernando passed 2 cars on track for position, which I was like, holy cow, that hasn't happened until Miami. And then Audi Joe said it, they had a fraught weekend. I mean, that's all there was to it. There was all sorts of, the legality issues and Nico struggling with reliability issues and all this kind of stuff. And it's just kind of like, well, that was a bit of a step backwards for those guys, it seemed. And so anyway, those teams were in the race because the results say that they were, but they were pretty anonymous. So that was my take.
Yeah, I do have more questions, but I do see the time and I know the day jobs are calling. So we're going to have to close it up for this race review, but I look forward, gentlemen, to another conversation. Okay, friends, what did you think of our conversation? Drop me a line via email, Sabrina@2guysaGirlandF1.com. Can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. And with that, let me say, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.